I think of myself as an optimist. I make it a point to look at the good things going on and not center my life around things that might go bad. I think that this quote best fits my philosophy. Every day may not be good, but there's always good in every day. There's a lot in this world to be thankful for. It can be something specific, like the job or the education that you have, the family and friends that you've made, or it can be something general, like you're living at the best point to be alive in human history. There's such an expansive world of technology and innovation to utilize and make the most of. Advances in healthcare, knowledge, and automation have all contributed to better living for humanity. This, of course, isn't to say that things aren't going bad in the world. Far from it, actually. There's a lot of things that we can improve, but I think that continually bogging your mind and remaining focused and pessimistic on those problems and issues is the wrong way to go about life. The question comes down on where to focus your attention. The mainstream media, I don't think, is the best source to look at. They tend to overemphasize bad stories and they try to paint a false picture, while the reality is that some, and maybe most, of these bad incidents, events, and statistics are actually quite rare. Some examples of this can be mass shootings and terrorism. Both of these events are statistically rare, but they gain a disproportionate coverage in the media. I think that continually casting your net too wide in terms of what you're looking for is a bad strategy. There are lots of global scale or national scale problems that you're not within any power to solve. Continually concerning yourself with these large scale problems only acts as a substitute for the problems that are relevant and important to you. I believe that if you focus on the problems that are closest to you, something that's local or personal, that are within your ability to solve, you'll have a better outlook, and you might even spread some of your success to others. What I want to focus on in this video is the general trend of things getting better and looking at some areas in which we can improve. A lot of this is going to be surface level observations without a lot of nuance to them, and each topic that I talk about has its own details and history that I don't think is important for this video. At some point in time, I want to talk specifically about how these good things came about and how they can be further improved, but each of these require a lot more digging on my part and separate videos. The first area that I want to look at is income, as it's pretty much the root of everything that we interact with. One of the ways that we suggest improving people's lives is an increase in the federal minimum wage. Proponents of it think that it will help families with the rising costs of certain necessities, and that this will help adults working 2 or 3 full-time jobs manage their lives. But we can break down what actual minimum wage workers look like using the Bureau of Labor Statistics data. So, there are 81.9 million hourly workers in the US. Of that, 1.7 million are working at or below the federal minimum wage. And of that, 905,000 are aged 25 years or older, and 742,000 are working full-time. So among hourly workers aged 25 or older, 1.4% are being paid at or below the federal minimum wage. And of workers working hourly, full-time or more, 1.2% were being paid at or below the federal minimum wage. What this tells me is that minimum wage workers are in the minority of all workers, and that most minimum wage workers are either under 25 years old, working part-time, or both. Since this doesn't apply to most of the workforce, let's look at some different measures. A better way to determine how well off people are is to look at their incomes. The Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis has provided the median usual weekly real earnings of wage and salary workers over 16 years old. It's a mouthful. At the end of 2009, median weekly earnings was at $344, and at the end of 2019, it was $362. An increase of 5% over the decade. Over that same time span, real median household income rose from $58.8 thousand to $63.2 thousand, an increase of 7%. I can even look further back in time with median household income and see that it was 51.7 thousand percent in 1984, which denotes an increase of 22%. Another metric along this line is employee compensation over time. From 2008 to 2018, total compensation went from $6.4 trillion to $9.4 trillion, a 46% increase. Over that same time period, the population rose from 304.1 million to 327.2 million. This means that compensation per capita in 2008 was $21,000, and in 2018 it was $28.7,000. A 36.5% increase. While this is great, I should note that although real wages and incomes are rising, they have about the same purchasing power as they did 40 years ago, according to Pew Research. People often cite rising benefit costs, the decline of labor unions, lagging education, and job switching restrictions as to why this is the case. All of these are important in their own respect, but they aren't entirely relevant for this video. Poverty is also an important measure to study, as it's correlated with higher rates of disease and disability, and it's absolutely crippling to families, children, and communities. The poverty rate has been declining in the US, according to the Census Bureau. In 2008, it was 13.2%, and in 2018, it was 11.8%, a 10.6% decrease over time. We can also look at unemployment numbers. In December of 2009, the rate was 9.9%, and in December of 2019, it was 3.5%, a decrease of 64.65%. Both of these are subject to fluctuations over time, but overall, they're at incredibly low points. Even comparing them to the 80s financial crisis, it's noticeable how low unemployment has actually become. Looking globally, extreme poverty has also declined. According to the World Bank, the percentage of people living on $1.90 a day has been reduced from 20.7% to 10% from 2005 to 2015. Another metric is people living at $5.50 a day, which over that same time period went from 60.4% to 46.1%. Our World in Data also presented a report on global income inequality. Economists Branko Milanovic and Christoph Lackner have looked at time periods from 1988 to 2011 and saw that while income inequality has certainly been on the rise over the past couple of centuries, it's been going down recently. The next section that I want to look at is food. It's obvious that we need food and water to survive, and it's amazing to see the strides humanity has made in terms of access, quality, and the price of food. Those three aspects are very important to easily provide people with cheaper and healthier food. First, I'm going to start with food access, and I'm going to take a look at the Global Hunger Index, a project that aggregates data from a wide variety of sources, including the World Health Organization, the World Bank, and UNICEF. When looking at global hunger, the index looks at four factors: undernourishment, child wasting, child stunting, and child mortality. The proportion and prevalence of all four categories has been reduced worldwide. The GHI score, the index's measure of the level of hunger and undernutrition, has fallen from 29 to 20 from 2000 to 2019. Secondly, I'll look at food quality. There really isn't some widespread metric when it comes to food quality, but there's a lot of new practices and technology to ensure that food comes out as best as it can be. Requiring ingredients and nutritional information on food products helps with transparency regarding what you eat. Advancements in genetic engineering has produced crops that are herbicide resistant and insecticide producing. Different styles of restaurants and grocery stores have completely different offers to customers. Fast food gives customers an opportunity to eat quickly, and some grocery stores offer pickup and delivery services nowadays, so that you don't have to waste time wandering through their store. Lastly, I have the Simon Abundance Index from Human Progress to measure food prices over time. This index looks at a variety of basic commodities and records their time price, which is the amount of time that a person has to work in order to earn enough money to buy something. Looking at this index, the average time price of their basket of 50 commodities fell by 72.3% from 1980 to 2018. Now I'm going to look at some specific foods. Chicken fell by 41.53%, bananas by 66.7%, beef 69.81%, corn 73.96%, wheat by 76.59%, pork by 85.01%, sugar by 86.30%. Another area that there's been great improvements in is luxury items. Although these items aren't necessary for survival, they vastly improve quality of life. Access to instant communication, knowledge, and resources helps connect all of us in order to make our lives better. Speaking broadly of transportation, the capital that it generates is estimated to be $7 trillion, coming from the Department of Transportation's annual report on transportation statistics. Transportation can come in many forms: air, water, highway, railway, transit. All of these different transportation mechanisms contribute heavily to our daily lives, whether we fly cross-country to a vacation spot or receiving an Amazon package. And there are further developments in this sector. While people can drive from place to place on their own, there's also transportation in the form of rideshare apps like Uber and Lyft, which are remarkably cheap. Regarding cars, the development of electric and self-driving cars have sparked changes in the environment and safety mechanisms. Advancements in railway technology, like Japan's high-speed rail, helps connect Japan's vast network in a quick and efficient manner. And even airline ticket prices have fallen over the course of 50 years by about 50%. We live in a golden age where travel and transportation are no longer the luxury of the rich. Most anyone can afford to engage in this. Next, I want to talk about appliances. This ranges from refrigerators and microwaves to washers and dryers, and even televisions and radio. These appliances have seen massive price reductions over time, as well as being seen in more and more households. In 1971, only 43.3% of all US households had a color TV, but by 2005, 97.4% of poor American households owned one. These appliances aid us in our day-to-day lives. They assist us in completing arduous tasks like cleaning our clothes or warming and cooking our food. They even provide a lot of entertainment value in the palm of our hand. Moving on to technology, there have been massive strides over time. It seems that new developments are being found even at exponential rates. Increases in CPU processing power has been driving improvements and developments in television and smartphones. Talking about phones, 81% of Americans have a smartphone. 96% of Americans have a normal cell phone. Devices that can instantly help you communicate with someone across the country, or even the entire world, is absolutely amazing. Especially with the recent news regarding the coronavirus, it's obvious to see that a massive transition from people working in corporate office buildings to working remotely from their homes. Technological changes like these have obviously been useful in halting the spread of the virus. It's insane to think that a device such as a smartphone could have been possible 20 years ago. But today it's a luxury that even the poorest among us have. And some of the best technologies have been created this century alone. The self-driving car, as well as the electric car, in competition with its gasoline counterpart. Artificial intelligence and robotics. Reusable commercial rockets. Skype and similar software like Discord and TeamSpeak. Virtual and augmented reality. There have even been massive expansions and improvements to the internet. I absolutely love the internet. It has a wide variety of uses, and there's always something for everyone on here. You can find any kind of useful information that you need through search engines like Google. On YouTube, you can find tutorials, entertainment, comedy, gaming, recipes, and much more. On social media sites, you can interact with friends and others in a variety of areas, and even form online communities to engage in. Even the ability to simply share information with others, whether it be through online learning or systems of peer-reviewed online journals, has communicated important knowledge and information necessary for developing the world further for our collective well-being. There's more to the internet than just what I've laid out, but these are the key areas in which I find the most important to point out. Violence is something that we, as members of society, want as minimized as possible. People involved in this can have their lives ruined, so it's in our best interest to find ways to reduce it and to keep it that way. Thankfully, trends suggest that crime and violence are going down. Violent crime has been on a tremendous decrease since the early 1990s. Pew Research compiled data from the FBI, which shows that from 1993 to 2018, the violent crime rate went from 747.1 to 368.9 per 100,000. Even property crime has decreased. Per 100,000, it went from 4,740 to 2,199.5 over the same time span. Moving on to hate crimes. The data on this is tricky. The FBI collects data on hate crimes using self-reporting law enforcement agencies, so there's certainly going to be some data that's left behind. But I found the FBI's 2000 report on hate crime statistics, as well as their database on the 2018 hate crime data. I found that 11,690 law enforcement agencies reported 8,063 bias-motivated criminal incidents in 2000. In 2018, 16,039 agencies reported 7,120 hate crimes. This means that reporting went up about 37% and hate crimes decreased by about 11%. Another great analysis that I found was by Meme Policeman, a page dedicated to pointing out misleading and false memes on social media and popular political pages. They analyzed the 2018 hate crime data from the FBI and compared it to last year, and found some positives and some negatives. I highly urge you to check this analysis out. It gives a very fresh perspective on what's usually portrayed in the media. Lastly, I want to talk about terrorism. Terrorism is a very important concern for Americans, with 74% of the population saying it should be a top priority for Trump and Congress to address, according to Pew Research. But looking at the numbers, terrorism accounts for very little deaths each year in the US, about 0.01%. Also, the number of terrorist attacks have dropped tremendously from 1970 to 2017, going from 468 to 65. On a bit of a lighter note, I want to talk about charity. It absolutely warms my heart to see altruistic people taking sacrifices in order to help the worse off in society. The National Center for Charitable Statistics published a brief about the nonprofit sector. The number of nonprofits rose from 1.41 million to 1.56 million from 2005 to 2015, 10.4% increase. The revenue generated comes to close around $1 trillion each year, about 5.4% of GDP. The number of public charities in 2015 was 1.09 million, a 28.4% increase from 2005. Total giving is estimated to be $410 billion in 2017, up from an inflation-adjusted $367 billion in 2007, which is a 10% increase. And in 2017, 25.1% of the population volunteers their time to help with social services, travel, performing arts, and much more, donating 8.8 billion hours of time. Lastly, I want to talk about the environment. There's been tons of news regarding the destruction of the climate and the environment. Reactions to catastrophic climate change and proposals like the Green New Deal shows how worried people truly are about the environment. I want to start by looking at deaths from radical weather. Human Progress notes that climate-related deaths have decreased by 96% over the past century. This includes floods, droughts, storms, wildfires, and extreme temperatures. Looking at this graph, it's noticeable that non-climate related deaths haven't changed that much, but they're very comparable currently to climate-related deaths. And while the frequency of natural disasters is on the rise, the number of deaths has dramatically decreased. Carbon emissions have dramatically increased over time, likely attributed to industrialization. But while there's been large increases of emissions in places like China and India, the US and European countries have made efforts to decrease yearly emissions. The US produced 6.13 billion tons of carbon dioxide in 2007 and 5.27 billion in 2017, a decrease of 14%. I attribute this to the Kuznets curve, a concept which shows that as a country develops, it cares little for the environment until it gets wealthy. Initial economic growth begins to devastate the environment, but when economic growth hits a certain point, destruction of the environment levels out, and people begin to build it back up with the wealth that they generated. Also, there's been a massive shift in the variety of energy sources we use today. Nuclear and renewable energies are on the rise in this country. Nuclear accounts for about 8.6% of the country's energy, and renewables total about 10.4%. And sources like coal and petroleum are slowly declining. Also, there are amazing new technologies. Smaller wind turbines meant to fit between the medians of the road, small hydroelectric generators, newer solar panels, strides in the safety and reduction of waste in nuclear energy facilities, and waste collection devices and technologies. Now that I'm done talking enthusiastically and optimistically, let's talk about some room for improvement. I'm not going to make the case that everything is going perfectly, because it certainly isn't. There are issues when it comes to major institutions such as healthcare and education. Even massive cultural swings and lifestyle trends have become very upsetting. I'll begin with healthcare. Healthcare expenditures have dramatically increased over time, going from $27.2 billion in 1960 to $3.5 trillion in 2017. As a percentage of GDP over time, it went from 5% to 17.9%. And there are lots of reasons as to why healthcare prices are increasing. Some cite government regulation and policy, as well as lifestyle changes. Others cite an aging population, a rise in chronic illness, increased ambulatory cost, increased premiums, and a lack of transparency. Health outcomes are affected by this, because people are intimidated by the price, and this results in people hesitating to go get proper treatment for themselves. Another useful institution in society that has seen tremendous price increases is education. The price of college tuition has increased 197% from 1996 to 2016, and college textbooks saw a 207% price increase. Even student loan debt has been increasing markedly. At the end of 2009, student loans owned were $771 billion, and at the end of 2019 is $1.643 trillion, a 113% increase. These stark price increases end up leaving students in debt, possibly with a degree that they can't make good on the loans that they have taken out. I also want to add another note about both healthcare and education. Both of these industries suffer a third-party payer problem. That means that the person purchasing the service isn't the consumer in most circumstances, which results in market prices not necessarily being reflective of consumer preferences. I want to move on to drug usage. Thankfully, long-term smoking is on the decline, but vaping is up, especially in young people. But since there's no long-term study on the effects of vaping, people just brush it off immediately by saying it's better than smoking. But that's not necessarily the case. Vaping can still damage your lungs and heart, and it can be as addictive as traditional smoking. Seeing a rise in the youth usage of vaping to me is very troubling. Now I want to take a slightly more somber look into drug overdoses. The CDC says that drug overdose rates have been on the rise over the past 2 decades. In 1999, there were 16,000 overdose deaths, and in 2018, there were 67,000, a 318% increase. Specifically, there's been a sharp increase in fentanyl and tramadol-related overdoses over the past decade, while drugs like heroin and commonly prescribed opioids have either plateaued or have been reduced. This has been brought about by some measure of overprescription by pharmaceutical companies and healthcare providers, which ended up giving people opioid addictions. And the response to this has been subpar. We're arresting people rather than treating them for the situation that they're in, and this results in people having worse outcomes. One issue that I'd very much like to see resolved is political polarization. It seems that there's a lot of social unrest going around, especially with 2020 looming around the corner, and this comes in a variety of factors. Public perception of partisan conflicts has increased over time. The median Democrat and median Republican have drifted further apart. Faith in government has decreased, and there's higher polarization and division in the media choice of people. Losing faith in these institutions and each other impacts our problem-solving capabilities. This is important to me because we all want the same things in the end, we just differ on the means to get there. With all the good and bad I've presented in mind, what should we do about it? As I've laid out, the world has gotten better in a lot of different ways, but there's still opportunity for improvement. For instance, we need to think more about automation and how it has the potential to take away certain jobs and occupations. We need to look at who's at the bottom rung of the social ladder and ways to lift them up. Regarding the environment, we should act quickly and better adapt new energy sources and technologies. And while violence is on the decline, in certain situations it's becoming more deadly, and we have to figure out how to handle these rare events. So here's what I suggest. These issues that I've laid out have massive implications nationally and globally, but they also impact localities, and that's where I think it's important to start. Pick an issue that's close to you and work on it. Build up your communities, volunteer your time, and donate to charity. Most importantly, know your limits. You aren't in any power to make change on a large scale. It's a lot more doable on a smaller one. And once you're satisfied making change and helping in a small sphere, you can gradually move outward and repeat the processes. That's all that I have this time around. I really hope that you enjoyed this. I know that I really enjoyed making this. There's more to come in the future. I promise. I'll see you next time.